Racist landlord tries to evict black woman. Finds out she owns the building. Now let me tell you how that went down, because what started as a casual Tuesday in a rundown apartment complex turned into a reckoning nobody saw coming, especially not Mr. Leonard Whitaker, the so-called owner of the Maple Hollow Apartments, a 63-year-old white man with leathery skin, yellow teeth, and an attitude that stank worse than the mildew in apartment 2B, always strutting around with his keys, jingling like some sheriff in an old western, wearing a sweat-stained fishing hat, a crusty flannel shirt, and boots he swore were work boots but ain't worth a day past 1983. And on this day, this exact morning, he had his sights set on Ms. Patrice Daniels, a 56-year-old black woman with locks down to her shoulders, a smooth cocoa complexion, and eyes that didn't miss a thing. Always wore a pressed blouse tucked into slacks, even on her off days. Carried herself like someone with purpose, because she had it, grace, strength, and an unshakable quiet power. But Leonard ain't see that. All he saw was a tenant he didn't want. Someone he could bully. Someone he could scare off so he could renovate. Slap some granite countertops in, call it urban chic, and double the rent for the next 20-something with a dog and a trust fund. And that's exactly why he marched up to apartment 3C with a clipboard in one hand and a crooked grin on his face, banging on Patrice's door like he paid the bills, yelling, "Open up, Patrice. We need to talk about your lease." And when she opened it, calm as a whisper, standing there in house shoes and a linen shirt, he didn't even give her a chance to speak. Just started with, "I'm terminating your lease effective immediately. You've been late too many times and I'm tired of the excuses." But see, what he didn't know, and what made this whole thing poetic, was that Patrice hadn't been late on rent since 2009. She paid early every month, and had receipts longer than his eviction list. So she just tilted her head and asked softly, "May I see the notice in writing?" And Leonard, already puffed up, waved the clipboard in front of her like it was law, said, "Right here, and you got 30 days to pack your little boxes and move on, unless you want a sheriff involved." And that right there, that little phrase, "your little boxes," that was when something shifted in Patrice's face. Not anger, not fear, but disappointment, like watching a dog bark at a lion and not realize his place. And she didn't raise her voice, didn't slam the door. She just smiled and said, "All right, Mr. Whitaker, give me a moment," and closed the door gently. Came back 2 minutes later with a manila folder, opened it slow, and handed him a document marked Deed of Trust across the top in bold, with her name, Patrice Elaine Daniels, listed as the sole owner of Maple Hollow LLC, the parent company that had purchased the entire complex 6 months ago. And the silence that fell between them was thick enough to butter toast, Leonard blinking like his brain had skipped a step, stammering, "Wait, what is this? What are you talking about?" But she just pointed to the seal, to the county registration number, and to the date that proved she had been his landlord this whole time, not the other way around. And now he was trespassing, harassing a tenant on property he didn't own. And that's when her voice finally rose, not in volume but in weight, when she said, "Leonard, I gave you a chance when I bought this building. I let you stay on as property manager because I knew what would happen to you otherwise, but this is the second complaint I've had this week about you threatening tenants. And now you've harassed me in my own home, and I won't allow it again." And Leonard tried to backpedal, sweat beading on his temples, mumbling excuses about misunderstandings and just doing his job. But it was too late, because behind him, 2 more doors opened, tenants peeking out, including Ms. Alvarez from 2D and Henderson Boyd from 1A, all of whom had their own stories about Leonard's rudeness, his threats, his sudden inspections. And Patrice turned to them and said, "If anyone here has been mistreated or felt unsafe, you'll have my full support in filing complaints, and effective immediately. Mr. Whitaker is relieved of his duties." And she said it loud enough for the whole 3rd floor to hear, and the look on Leonard's face was priceless. Like a man who just found out the gold mine he thought he controlled was actually a trapdoor. And Patrice didn't gloat, didn't revel in his downfall. She just handed him a formal notice of termination and said, "You have until noon to collect your belongings from the office, and I recommend you do so without bothering anyone else." And with that, she stepped back into her apartment, closed the door, and left him standing there, exposed, evicted, and powerless on the very concrete he thought he ruled. And from that day forward, Maple Hollow changed. Maintenance requests were answered. Rents were frozen for seniors. The laundry room got new machines, and Patrice set up monthly tenant meetings where folks could voice their needs without fear. And the building started to feel like home, not just housing. Because when a black woman owns a place and remembers where she came from, everybody rises. In Leonard? Last I heard, he moved into a trailer out near Dobbins Creek, still telling people he used to run things in the city, but ain't nobody listening. Because power built on lies always collapses when truth walks in wearing house shoes and dignity. Now word travels fast when dignity wins and shame gets served cold. And after what happened with Leonard Whitaker, folks all across the neighborhood started whispering about the woman in apartment 3C, the one who flipped the script without breaking a sweat, who evicted the evictor and turned Maple Hollow from a rundown slum into a place folks were proud to call home. But see, that kind of power, especially when held by a black woman with quiet grace, it don't go unnoticed by the ones who think they're supposed to own everything. So it was only a matter of time before the real wolves came sniffing. Men in suits this time, polished shoes and briefcases full of empty promises. And they came knocking 3 weeks later, right after Patrice posted a flyer in the lobby about plans to start a free after-school tutoring program in the old laundry storage room. She was sitting at the small desk in the office downstairs, going over renovation quotes when the bell above the door chimed, and in walked 3 men, 1 white, 1 Latino, and 1 black, all in tailored suits that looked like they hadn't breathed in real air in years. The white one spoke first, his voice syrupy sweet like he practiced sounding friendly, said, "Ms. Daniels, my name is Mr. Keene from Delridge Development Group, and we've been following your progress here. Very impressive what you've done with the property." And Patrice didn't even look up from her papers, just said, "And," because she already knew what was coming next, and sure enough, the Latino one, Rodriguez or something, stepped in with, "We're here to make you an offer, Ms. Daniels. Something fair, generous even, to take this off your hands so you can move on to bigger things." And the black man, younger than the rest, just stood there quiet, eyes scanning her like he was trying to figure out what angle she played. But Patrice finally looked up, folded her hands, and said, "Tell me, what exactly do you think I want to move on from? Stability? Community? Legacy?" And Keene chuckled like she told a joke, said, "Look, we understand what you're doing here, but let's be honest, this area is changing, and we can help you get ahead of the curve, maybe even partner on a bigger project downtown." But Patrice's eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped low, calm but firm, like the sound of thunder before it rains. "So let me get this straight. You want to sell the homes of 48 families, uproot elders, displace children, and hand this over to A, company that'll tear it down for luxury lofts nobody in the zip code can afford?" And they paused, glanced at each other, and the young black man finally spoke, his voice smoother but colder. "If you don't sell now, you're going to face pressure. Code enforcement, zoning reviews, maybe even utility rate hikes. And trust me, you don't want to be holding the bag when that happens." And that right there, that thin little threat wrapped in diplomacy. That was the moment Patrice stood up, slow, deliberate, her linen blouse still crisp, her locks still neat, and said, "You mistaken me for someone who's afraid of pressure. I've lived through redlining, layoffs, and Leonard Whitaker. I know exactly how this game is played. And let me make something plain. I didn't buy this place for profit. I bought it for protection. And if you come for me, you best bring more than fancy talk and veiled threats." And with that, she handed them each a tenant impact report she compiled. Graphs, data, testimonials, even letters from city council members who supported her affordable housing mission and said, "You see this? This is power too. The kind that's earned, not bought." And they left that office stiff-backed, muttering about missed opportunities. But one of them, the black one, hesitated at the door, looked back and said, "They're not going to stop coming." And Patrice just smiled and said, "Good. Let him come. I'm not alone." And she wasn't, because later that week, something remarkable happened. Ms. Alvarez from 2D started a tenants committee. The Henderson twins taught Saturday coding classes in a rec room, and a GoFundMe to replace the roof hit its goal in 2 days. Folks from 3 different buildings offered to help paint walls, fix pipes, even start gardening in the courtyard. And as Maple Hollow bloomed, the pressure did come: inspections, surprise visits, anonymous complaints. But each time, Patrice met them head-on with paperwork, with community backing, and once with a whole press conference in front of the building, cameras flashing as she declared, "Affordable housing is not a liability. It's a lifeline. and I won't let them strangle in the name of profit. And the clip went viral, reached city council, and one by one, the wolves backed off because she made it too public, too principled to bulldoze quietly. And by the end of that year, she secured nonprofit status for the complex, froze rent increases for 5 years, and set up a tenant equity program that let long-term residents earn stake in future renovations. And Leonard, he tried to sue for wrongful termination, claimed he'd been tricked, but the judge dismissed it in 15 minutes flat. And the last anyone saw of him, he was working part-time at a bait shop off Route 9, still wear that crusty flannel shirt, still talking about the time he almost owned a complex. But the truth was, the complex was never his, not really. It belonged to Patrice Daniels the moment she walked into that leasing office with a dream, a plan, and enough fire in her chest to burn. Down every lie ever told about who's allowed to own, who's allowed to lead, and who gets to stay. And when folks walk past Maple Hollow today, they don't see a forgotten block, they see legacy, and they nod to Ms. Daniels on her morning walk. Shoulder square, stride strong, dignity untouchable. Because when a black woman builds something rooted in love and truth, not even the wolves can tear it down. It was a humid Sunday afternoon when Patrice Daniels stood beneath the old oak tree in the courtyard of Maple Hollow, a clipboard in one hand and a vision board in the other, kids chasing bubbles behind her, neighbors gathered in a half circle with folding chairs and styrofoam cups of sweet tea. And though the sky threatened rain, no one moved because they all knew this wasn't just a block meeting. It was a culmination of a battle they'd all fought in their own way, the final stitch in a quilt of resistance that Patrice had started the day Leonard Whitaker called her just another tenant and tried to snatch her dignity with a smirk. See, this wasn't about property anymore. It was about presence, about standing in a place where you were told you didn't belong, and claiming it anyway, brick by brick, voice by voice. And as Patrice cleared her throat to speak, the front gate creaked open one last time, and in walked Wesley Harwood, the regional director for Delridge Development Group, flanked by 2 assistants and a nervous-looking city representative holding a binder thick enough to choke a conscience. And all eyes turned to him, the man whose company had spent 6 months trying to pressure Patrice out, filed noise complaints, offered buyouts to tenants, even lobbied to have the building rezoned. But none of it stuck, because Patrice had done the work, secured permits, dotted every I, crossed every T, and built a paper trail stronger than cement. Wesley walked up, slow, smiled the way wolves do before they bite, and said, "Ms. Daniels, I'm here today to extend a final offer. We're prepared to double our initial purchase price, relocate every tenant at no cost, and fund your next development anywhere in the city." And for a moment, the crowd went silent. The numbers were tempting, enough to buy a whole block, retire early, maybe even disappear. But Patrice didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply raised her hand and said, "There is no price on community." Then turned to the crowd and added, "I didn't fight for Maple Hollow, so someone else could erase it with glass and chrome. This isn't a stepping stone, it's a foundation." And Wesley's smile cracked just slightly, the kind of crack that happens when a man realizes his playbook don't work no more. Because Patrice wasn't just one woman. She was dozens, hundreds, generations of women who cleaned buildings they couldn't live in, raised children who couldn't get approved for loans, and walked through this world being told no in 1,000 different ways, only to build their own yes brick by brick. Wesley tried one last time, his voice slick. "You're making this personal. This is business." But Patrice leaned forward, eyes sharp, chin high, and said, "That's your problem. You think business ain't personal when it uproots lives, displaces grandmothers, and replaces playgrounds with parking garages, but to us, it's all personal." And with that, she turned away from him, dismissed him with silence, the most powerful no she could give, and the crowd erupted, cheers rising over the hum of cicadas, kids laughing, elders clapping, because that was a moment they knew they'd won. Not just a building, but the right to define their lives on their own terms. And as Wesley retreated, tail tucked behind that expensive suit, Patrice stepped up to the mic they'd set on a folding table and made the announcement that would echo far beyond their little corner of the city. Starting this fall, Maple Hollow will launch the Daniels Initiative for Community Ownership, a fund dedicated to helping working families buy the buildings they live in, manage their own blocks, and build generational wealth in places where they were told they had none. And the city rep looked stunned, flipping through his binder like he missed a memo, but Patrice just smiled at him and said, "We're not waiting for permission anymore." And over the next few months, Things move fast. The Daniels initiative gained donors, even national media attention. Other neighborhoods started calling, asking how they could do the same, and Patrice trained them, guided them, passed the knowledge forward like a torch lit from her own fire. And while she still walked Maple Hollow every morning, still knew every creaky floorboard in which kids left chalk drawings on the steps, her voice now echoed in city hall meetings, on news panels, and in living rooms across the country where mothers dare to believe they too could be more than renters. They could be builders, owners, protectors of something lasting. And one night, months later, as the sun dipped low and the courtyard glowed with string lights and laughter, Patrice sat on the same bench where she once signed those first ownership papers, eyes watching the community bloom. And a young girl named Nia, maybe 8 or 9, ran up and asked, "Ms. Patrice, is it true you own this whole building?" And Patrice chuckled soft, brushed the girl's braids from her forehead and said, "No, baby, not just me, we all do." And that right there's a truth, the full circle, the revolution in real time. Not loud, not violent, but unshakable, because when the world underestimates a black woman, when it tries to move her like furniture or silence her like noise, it forgets that her very existence is resistance. And when she rises, she don't rise alone. She brings a whole community with her. And they don't just survive, they thrive. Because legacy built on truth don't crack, don't fold, and don't ever go quietly. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that matter. And let's keep the conversation going.